There's a question in the rear here from a 7th grade history teacher.
Hey. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for coming. I bring from my 7th grade class a whole envelope filled with letters to you. We had a challenge on who could write the best letter, so I promised that I'd forward those on to you. I'll send them to your office or whatnot.
All right, I'd like to receive them.
You bet, and they'd like to have you read them. The big question for my students is, why did you become Vice President of the United States?
Why did I become Vice President?
Yes.
That's one of the things we left out of the book, Liz. No, it's a very interesting question because over the years in my capacity as Secretary of Defense, Congressman, President Ford's Chief of Staff, and so forth, I had experienced or observed the experience that a lot of vice presidents had, that it wasn't a lot of fun being Vice President of the United States. It wasn't a real job, and a lot of people held that view. I always remember Jerry Ford congratulated me on being being nominated to be Vice President of the United States. But then he added, he said, "Dick, that's the worst job. Those are the worst. Those are the worst 9 months of my entire life was when I was Vice President." And then laughed. Basically, the way it happened was I had been offered, I'd been asked early on in 2000 by one of then Governor Bush's staff people if I would agree to have my name considered. And I said no. I said, I think that's a bad idea. I've got a real job. I don't want to go back into government. That's not for me. And I'm at that stage. I was running a big oil services company, not exactly one of the best loved kinds of bases from which to launch a political career. We had the problem with the 12th Amendment. The President and I were both then living in Texas and registered in Texas. 12th Amendment of the Constitution doesn't allow the electors from a state to cast their votes for both president and vice president for somebody from that same state. So anyway, I took a pass. Then the president came back a few weeks later and he said, "Well, look, will you help me find somebody?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to do that." It was a part-time job. There was a beginning and an end, and I figured I could handle that. I'd been through other searches for vice president. I'd done it for President Ford back in '76, so it wasn't new territory for me. So we went to work. We got down to the tail end. We'd had sort of our last meeting scheduled before the convention down at the ranch outside Crawford, and went over the entire list of candidates that I'd developed and that had been screened. And then we had lunch with President and Laura, and then he and I went out on the back porch. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, Dick, you're the solution to my problem," which I took as a threat. But I said, "Look, what I will do is go check to see what I have to do in order to get myself to the point where I could be a candidate for to be your running mate." But that meant I had to figure out what I was going to do with the company I was then running, a chairman, chief executive officer of a large energy services company. We had to have a way to vet my health status. I needed to have my doctor talk to the president's doctor, have them evaluate what my health status was. We had to deal with the registration issue. I had to re-register in Wyoming, and because he was registered in Texas. I had a series of things. And I wanted him to allow me to come down to Austin the next weekend and sit down and give him all the reasons why it was a bad idea. And he agreed that I could come do that. And I even lined up Karl Rove. Karl went with me because he thought it was a bad idea too. So, in other words, I went in to be interviewed for this job, and I found a guy, who didn't agree with me, or who agreed with me and who didn't actually want to go in and recommend me for the job, and I took him with me that time. That's what I should have done when I went to Rumsfeld's office the first time. But we went through the exercise and had a good chat, and a couple of days later he called and he said, "You're my guy," which would be my vice president. You could make the argument that I'm from Wyoming. If he's not going to carry Wyoming, he's not going to carry any place. I mean, it's not like he needed my help to carry Wyoming. It was only 3 electoral votes. I mean, who cares about 3 electoral votes? Well, 2000 turned out to be pretty important. 3 electoral votes. So he was wiser than I was. But I became convinced as I had gone through that spring with him, talking about the job and what kind of person we wanted for the job and what he anticipated the duties and responsibilities of the vice president would be. I came away convinced that this was a guy with his own well-developed sense of what he was looking for. It wasn't just some fly-by-night political decision he'd make and you put the guy's name on the ballot and then forget about it. He, in fact, wanted somebody who had the kind of experiences I had as Secretary of Defense, et cetera, and that he was very serious about allowing me to be an integral part of the team, to get involved in whatever I wanted to get involved in, and to bring to the job the opportunity to have a significant impact. And of course, at that stage, neither one of us anticipated what was going to happen on 9/11. But so I took the job. I felt an obligation in part, and I, having gone through the process, what I think he never took no for an answer. He'd asked me once before, and I'd said no. I thought I'd taken care of it. No. I think he put me through that exercise of checking out everybody else so that I could convey or persuade myself that I was the right guy for the job. And that's in effect the way it worked. But it was, I'll always be grateful for the opportunity he gave me. It was an enormously important period of time to be there. And as I say, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to serve in that capacity. And by the time we got down to that point, I really felt an obligation that if he really wanted me, he was going to be my president, and I'd salute smartly and do it as best I could.
Well, we're delighted you did it, Mr. Vice President.